On February 20th, 1943, Tunisia, north of the Kasserine Pass. The battle report would never fully take pictures of what the German tank leaders seen in the morning. The American Sherman tanks doing moves that were against the Wehrmacht philosophy, said everything was possible even without seeing through the smoke and dust of North Africa. 5 Sherman tanks on the battlefield, broken land with no line between them, of sight between them, came together on German places with timing that looked like supernatural. There should be no colors, flares, or dispatch riders are running from one car to another. Still, they moved as a single body. Each tank fills in weak spots. Some people couldn't see. Every worker knows exactly where their friends were. Put together in German Panzer IVs, equipped with Fuji 5S radios, tank leaders had a hard time hearing their own group leaders through static that slammed their systems for amplitude variation. The German receivers with 10 watts, by the standards of the 1930s, couldn't get through more than a few, several hundred meters when the tanks were moving. Most of the German tanks had only receivers who couldn't say what they call for help or a saw. The Americans were working together with Germans didn't know about this technology. There was radios with frequency modulation in. Every tank was controlled by a crystal, accuracy, and 25 watts of output. Strong and clear words that cut through noise from engines and confusion on the battlefield. A knife through paper. 8,000 m from the production lines in Detroit. The important technology edge of World War II was becoming clear. Not in gun size or thickness of defense, but in the electric waves that can't be seen, that linked all of the American tank crews in ways that Wehrmacht never thought possible. Things started to change on July 22, 1941, when the U.S. The Army made the Signal Corps radio standard settings SCR 508, SCR 528, and SCR 538 for all tanks that size, while the Germans were moving forward, using strategies to get through the Soviet Union, for which radio contact was necessary. In the space between command cars, engineers working at the Galvin factory, the company that became Motorola, were getting frequency modulation just right. German technology that would make out-of-date methods. The group of engineers, Daniel E. Noble, who came up with the idea, how FM technology can be used in war machines, and Henrik Magnoski, the main RF engineer who found the technical difficulties of setting up high-tech gadgets in the inside of a tank they're making, weighed 181 pounds and changed every Sherman tank into a hub in the world's first network for the war. The BC-604. The emitter put out 25 watts of power, twice as many as the German FUG-5S. Yield. It works between 20.0 and 27.9 MHz. It had 10 preset frequency ranges, channels directed by a crystal. Comfort. The 2 BC-603. Parts of the STR-508 radios. Leaders to keep an eye on many frequencies at the same time. The ability to. That would be the deciding factor in the battle. The real change was in the frequency. That variation itself. FM by Edwin Armstrong. Technology that was sold to the military. Got rid of the distortion and static that amplitude modulation had trouble with. Systems. While German tanks picked up as noise every time an electric current flows, American FM radios had good sound, talking even when weaponry is being used. Barges. On November 8, 1942, American armor came with Operation Torch to Africa. The 2nd Armored Corps tanks from the division landed near Safi and connect Fadala to SCR 508, radios that were soon to show their better interactions than German ones. Even though the Africa Corps was the most skilled armored vehicles in Wehrmacht force, worked in harsh conditions. Problems with conversation. A normal group of 5 German tanks. There were only 1 or 2 cars with full FUG-5 transceivers that can do both sending and getting. The rest of the tanks had FUG-2 on them. Only for catchers. Calls could be heard, but couldn't answer or tell enemy places to be. A group of German tanks worked through a strict system. The platoon leader sent orders that subordinate tanks were recognized by, instead of words, do things. When you say, tanks were destroyed, and they were easy to spot by their many antennas, whole The group lost its way. That this weakness would show. Absolutely terrible for American forces, where each gun could take charge. Thus things. The Battle of Kasserine Pass. From February 14th to February 24th, 1943, gave the first big display of American radio being better. Even though it was a defensive win for Germany, the battle showed skills that shocked people in the Wehrmacht. While the battle was getting confusing, some parts of the U.S. 1st Armored Division kept communication going across 50 miles of fighting ground. Tank workers who had warned of threats that were never planned jointly, each other of threats and asked help for artillery through crystal clear FM radio communications. German units that spy on signals. American communications were tapped and pointed out exceptional clarity and getting along. The spy service of the 10th Panzer Division. This part said that American units, they kept in touch at sites where German radios only sent out static. Read more. What was unsettling was realizing that it looked like every American tank could, not just direction, but full transmission. Having cars. The FUGG-5 radios from Germany that use amplitude modulation in the between 27.0 and 33.3 megahertz. There are some basic problems. The 10-watt emitter had a hard time. Reached 2 to 3 kilometers in good weather, falling to just a few hundred meters when there were moving cars. Each spark plug setting off every electric motor. Movement on the track caused interruption that could not be filtered by AM devices. In September 1943, American tanks arrived in Italy, where mountains should be, have taken away radio's benefits. Instead, FM technology turned out to be even more useful in circumstances that made German AM radios don't work. The SCR 508's frequency modulation took care of the problems with multiple paths of mountain. Amplitude is much worse for hills. Modulation. American tanks worked together. Ways of moving through land where it was impossible to send messages in German. All radios stopped working. As they moved toward the casino, American armored units showed skills that went against German. I understand. Tank platoons split up by ridgelines planned charges with exactness that German law said needed to see each other. The first after-action reports from the armored company explained how regular coordination works at long distances where German radios only still. On June 6, 1944, as the Sherman tanks rolled off the ground, the SCR 508 boat they used in Normandy, radios kept in touch with Navy. Help with fire, coordination difficult. With technology from Germany. But the Hedgehog, the fighting showed a very important gap. Tank. Their radios couldn't talk to Army radios that work on different the frequencies. The SCR 300 for the Army worked at 40.0 to 48.0 MGHz. Doesn't work with tanks 20 to 27.9 range of megahertz. This lack of contact led to death in the Battle of the Bulge, where German troops with Panzer Fouads could talk to Americans. Tanks while close American infantry had. There's no way to tell them. American. New ideas solved the issue inside weeks. Tank workers set up EE8 field phones that are welded to ammo boxes. Outside of the tank wired straight to talking within the company. Operation Cobra in late July. This, a small change changed everything about tank infantry working together. From July 25th to July 30th, 1944. During Operation Cobra, the full possibility for American radio to be better. The 2nd Armored Company, which was led by the Major General was Edward H. Brooks, organized more than 200 Sherman tanks through radio networks that made it possible. Never before seen battlefield control. German troops from the Panzer Lair. They were up against an enemy that seemed to be aware of strange things. American threats were met right away by tanks, told by units many miles away. Artillery strikes planned through. Tank radios got there within minutes of identifying the target. The difference between what Germany could do was harsh. The Panzer Lair was once Germany's top armored squad, had been reduced to lack of contact. Most tanks could work without radios if on signs seen in the ground where visibility rarely went above 100 m. The few radios that worked were affected by there is disturbance and a short range that stopped teamwork from working well. The irony was deep. It was Germany. Radios were first used in armored fighting. Heinz Scuderian was the author of Radio was important during Blitzkrieg. Tanks have had since the 1920s. In 1937, his book A Kung Panzer came out. Stressed that conversation was important too. Operations with armor. It was Guderian. Built radio transmission systems that helped tank leaders work together. Threats. He knew what rapid protection was. Progress needed reliable getting together. But by 1943, German tanks. The radios couldn't be provided by production. The teachings of Guderian said so. German production numbers showed the trouble. In 1943, Germany made about 5,700. There are big tanks, but not more than 2,000 FUG. Transceivers. A lot of radios went to cars in charge, and regular tank units will be left with attack guns. Terrible lack of communication, tools, and equipment. The Soviet tank units were hurt. Even worse is a lack of contact. The T-34, even though it was the most common Allied tank, usually went into battle without any kind of radio gear. The USSR doctrine was based on flag signs and planning a battle with catastrophic. The battle against the Germans in 1941. By 1943, Lend-Lease had given some thanks. American speakers, such as SCR-508, sets were put on Soviet command tanks, but even after the war was over, only about 25% of radios were on Soviet tanks. The similarity brought out American of achievement, even though the Soviet Union had a hard time getting 1/4 of their. America got tanks with radios, which they did. 100% use of advanced FM technology systems. Motorola's plant in Chicago stood for American Industrial at its peak of activation. Before that, during the war, the company made cars. A radio. Changing to the military. Complete retooling was needed for production and fixing never-before-seen technical problems. Each SCR-508, 2,748 were needed. Individual parts made to very high standards. The BC-604, 474 capacitors were in the transmission and 385 resistors. There were crystal clocks to keep the frequency stable despite extremes of weather and fighting. A shaking. Statistics on production told the history of the United States economic power. 1942, 3,800 SCR-508. Home radios in 1943, 11,400. Units 1944, 24,000 units during the war. The making of more than 50,000 tank radios. This miracle of production made sure that all 49,324 Sherman tanks were built during the advanced radios were sent to war zones. Tools, a feat like no other country came closer. The SCR-508s. The benefits went beyond just frequency. Modulation. Crystals set the energy. Stability meant that tanks could set channels before fight and keep up alignment even though they are in fight. German Fu G5 radios that use changeable. The setting of the capacitor kept going off. How often? The two receivers. The configuration let leaders keep an eye on their platoon net and business command net at the same time. Up and down the chain of command, orders came in right away while leaders kept being aware of the problems of subordinates. The BC-606. The intercom system was easily integrated with the radio, letting everyone on the crew to let the boss know about threats. Mics in the throat and headphones that block out noise made it clear. Talking while in battle. Lots of German tanks didn't have any intercoms at all, so for workers to talk by touch or yelling, power control was given. Another thing the Americans do well. SCR-508 worked with either 12 or 24 volts, automatically changing based on available power. The power source for the dynamo motor. Stable power that was filtered that gotten rid of electrical interference. German radios got their power straight from the electrical circuits in the cars picked up. Every spark is just air. What the tactical benefits of universal. The introduction of radio changed American armed doctrine. The order for battle. Structure and task groups that can change. Grouped to carry out certain tasks. Leaned on reliable completely. Talking to people. Commanders in the U.S. could make fight groups on the spot from different units. Sure they could. Coordinate using radios that work together. This adaptability confused the Germans. Leaders who are used to strict. The need for organizational structures. By the lack of contact. As part of the Battle of Ardennes. In September 1944, the 4th Armored Division had to deal with several German panzers. Units with better Panther tanks. The Germans had every edge. In guns and armor, but American. Radio communication was very important. Every Sherman could call in an enemy. Positions right away. Defenders for tanks. Got targeting information from. They couldn't see the tanks. Firearms. People watching from Sherman command tanks. Called in terrible bargains within minutes. For 3 weeks, the 4th, 281 German tanks were destroyed by armed, although they only lost 41 Shermans. A kill number of 7:1 that didn't make sense. The details. During the war, German spies didn't understand how important American conversation is better. Combat news talked about Americans' teamwork, but said it was because technology is not as important as teaching. Captured information in September 1944. The report said, American tank units show that you can handle the radio and coordination. This seems to lead to, from a lot of training and strict, how to communicate. The report. I totally missed the technological. Good thing. German strategies never changed. To the United States powers. They went on, aiming at so-called command tanks based on antenna configurations, not understanding. Every Sherman could work together. Responses on the battlefield. For fear of American troops, they planned ambushes. Tanks would lose their way when split up, not realizing that radio contact kept the unit together. No matter what eye contact there is. March 1945, when American troops got close to the Rhine, their ability to communicate better reached its highest point, the Remagen being taken over. This bridge showed how fast command and control in the U.S. When the 9th Armored Division found the news reports say Ludendorff Bridge is still there, reached the headquarters of the 1st Army within minutes. In just 1 hour, divisions all along the front were moving to take advantage of the chance. German forces that relied on phones, lines that American planes, destruction couldn't be planned, react at about the same speed. The United States radio planning led to one bridgehead's defense that can't be broken through. A group of tanks from different battalions, coordinated and smoothly integrated. Radio networks with fires. English. Counterattacks were not well planned because communication problems showed up piecemeal and were destroyed in every way. April 1945. The surrounding of the RER pocket showed the peak of American culture. Speaking skills are better. American tanks from the beginning of the war. The 9th and 10th Armies coordinated a complicated double wrapping all the way through. Talking on the radio. There are 325,000 in the pocket. They were trapped by German troops. Part of the reason was that their conversations fell down. American planes and fighters, led by forward planes with radios. Controllers killed everything. German points of contact. It's true. The units lost touch with higher, both the offices and each other. The last words of Field General Walter Model. Messages before the connection broke down showed the German situation. No talking to, with units next to it. Lack of conversation. Having a higher office. Putting up. Continues, but there is no way to coordinate. American radio was clearly better. Changed how the mental experience of war with tanks. American ships fought with being sure they were never alone, even when they were physically separated. Used radio waves to stay in touch. The German tank crews went through on the other hand, deep silence. Not able to. They talked, but they fought each other. Fights that happen as part of bigger wars. Otto Carrerius, one of the best German tank leaders who were successful, wrote in his A Story Called Tigers in the Mud is about the problems caused by limited contact. But he paid more attention to tactics, more than just the information gap itself. What this means for strategy lasted longer than individual fights. The U.S. made progress from 1944 to 1945, kept up the beat in part by using radio, coordinated in a way that the German army couldn't match. The race across France by the Third Army, built on radio networks that kept overall control over hundreds of miles. The German leaders always underrated the strength of the American people, since they couldn't think of the Americans are better at communicating. Taken over. Heinz Guderian in his job as an inspector The general of armored troops saw the. I tried to solve the problem, but failed. In a December 1944 letter, the fact that American coordination canceled out the Germans' tank advantages. Very good. When Germany gave up, the Americans. Teams of technical intelligence analysts looked at German tools and gear. What they found confirmed what kind of combat training thought of. A lot of German tanks had better protection and weapons, but catastrophically worse. Talking to people. Report on technical information from the U.S. Army. Number 176 came to an end. German transmission gear for tanks was about 5 years behind American systems. The lack of frequency, modulation, and limited radio transmission and bad power suppression led to important security holes. Soviet judges came to similar conclusions. In conclusion, if the Red Army could get in to take in German weapons, they chose to copy American radio styles instead of German plans for growth after the war. Statistics on production and release show the size of the American of achievement. Making American radio shows. 508528538. Radios made more than 50,000 units. Sherman tanks made 49,324 units. 100% of radios are sent out. 25 W of power for transmission. How often? Stability controlled by a crystal plus or less than 0.01%. Range moving 7 miles. Static range of 10 up to 15 miles. The German radio show FUG-5. Transmitting devices made about 6,000 units. Medium to heavy tanks were made close to 12,000 units. Full rate of radio deployment about 20%. 10 W of power for transmission. How often? Plus or minus 1% for the stable variable. Moving from 0.5 to 1 mile. Range 2 to 3 miles of being still. How well communication works. The norm from 3 to 5. It's time for the American fire mission. Minutes. How long German fire lasts on average. 15 to 30 minutes for the task. American tanks. Getting 100% balance. German tanks that can talk to each other. 20%. The fact that Sherman tanks had better radios. Set of accepted rules that govern. Armored battle right now. Main today. Battle tanks have radios on board that can be directly linked to the SCR-508. Digital instead of traditional but based on universal deployment and reliable working together. Back in the 1950s, the German Bundes was rebuilt. Set priorities for messages based on lessons from World War II. Every Leopard tank that has been made has equipped with full radio gear. A clearly written Bundes training manual has the words, the defeat of better German. American tanks buy less than stellar ones with better radios teach that information. Platform is less important than power of being better. Conflicts today prove this lesson. During the Gulf War in 1991, Allied forces with better connections cut off. The Iraqi troops were equipped with better Soviet-made tanks, but bad radios. In 2003, American forces once more showed that network platform is lost to focused fighting. American wars from a central point of view. Radio performance of the Sherman tank stands for a win in what the electromagnetic spectrum showed. More important than benefits in armor or heavy weapons. They fought their war in tanks. Some people aren't seeing this change. Finding out after the fact that every Sherman, the tank wasn't just a battleship, but a point in the first history network for battlefields. The SCR-508 radio turned the M4 Sherman into an sufficient medium tank into a part of a set of guns that had any other American tanks that are out there. This change turned out to be more important than any change to the protection or what guns could have done. Each Sherman tank had the tools of win, and not just because of its 75mm gun or armor with slopes, but in the 181 pounds of radio tools that let its team connect to every other American tank crew. The link made a group knowledge that no single German tank, no matter how much better its protection is, their strength or weapons could match. Found out about this fact through bitter enjoy at the Kasserine Pass in Italy's over France's hedgerows through the mountains. And in the last fights against Germany, tanks showed that they could work together. German law said it couldn't happen without making eye contact. The Wehrmacht never came up with a good counter because They didn't fully understand the gap in technology. Wilhelm Keitel, a field general, reported, comment when Germany gave up. We knew. You already knew how to make better tanks. Caught how to get them to work together. An important truth, whether it's true, quoted, or made up. The U.S. had built more than 49,324. There were 49,324 Sherman tanks. Parts of the first protected in the world. Combat network. The change in things about war that historians identify with current network, and the real war began in 1942, when the SCR-508 was put in the first Sherman tank. Radio joined the battle. From that point on, the war changed everything for good. Better messaging would beat the on the side with better tools, would make the base, and the linked would beat the isolated. The change that happened was mostly German troops couldn't see them. The Americans had better tactics, but didn't see its technical value until it was way too late. It was time for German leaders to understand that every Sherman tank had the ability to communicate that most. Due to a lack of German tanks, the war was, in reality, the Germans won. The military's failure to see and learn how to talk to Americans. Being better is one of the main causes of World War II. Made big mistakes with his brains, even though they had been in many battles, showing that Americans can work together. Benefits, but German leadership never solved their most important problems first. Communication problems. They went on, making better tanks that could fight as people who were alone, while American forces made good tanks that could fight, working together as teams. At the end of the day, electromagnetic waves, pushed by SCR-508, they turned out to be stronger than the German 88mm shots that went through armor. Guns. The ability to work together, to share information right away to help fight as a single force instead of as individual cars. Advantage made success more likely than any clear advantage in armor. The Sherman tanks had better radios. Changed war for good by building the idea that in modern battle, isolation and relationship are the same thing. Defeat. This fact was found by German troops on 3 countries' worth of battlefields. Too late to learn that the Americans had more than just numbers, superiority, but scientific progress, better performance in the area that the most important thing was being able to fight as fun.